Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Today's question is looking forward. How big are games of Warhammer The Old World actually going to be? Well, what do I mean by this? Well, historically, with the exception of 8th edition, as far back as I can remember, in any event, Warhammer Fantasy games were played at 2,000 points. So that goes back to about 5th, 4th, maybe 4th edition games. Things changed, however, in 8th edition. Now, 8th edition itself has been often labelled as problematic due to its accessibility issues, which meant people weren't buying into the game, they weren't collecting new armies. The lack of sales being one of the drivers for why the game ceased to be, and we saw the rise of Age of Sigmar. And when you had rules like Horde and Steadfast, which encouraged players to have huge units, needing to buy 4 or 5 packs of the same thing, paint them all just to get one unit on the table, yes, that did definitely play into the accessibility of the game. But there's something we have to bear in mind here, that it's not all Games Workshop's fault. Yes, rules like that definitely played a part in causing issues. However, I mentioned that the game was traditionally played at 2,000 points. That's not true of 8th edition, because the size of armies, the points cost of armies, increased. In the tournament scene, we saw a real shift from that 2,000 point initial window to 2,400 points. And because the casual game, certainly the game played in clubs, etc., often follows the standard for tournaments, even to the extent of using standard comp systems like South Coast GT comp or Swedish comp, you see everyone having to play by what the community is dictating through the tournaments. Yes, your casual game on a kitchen table encounter won't have this issue, but club games frequently did. Now, I don't know the reason why 2,400 became the norm. Yes, it divides nicely into the 25%, 50%, etc. breakdowns that you needed to comply with for your army. But I suspect one of the big points is it meant competitive armies didn't necessarily have to compromise. What do I mean by this? Well, at 2,000 points, you might not necessarily be able to whack in all of the stuff that you really want, all of the good things. There'll be compromises, there'll be weaknesses that can be exploited. Whereas at 2,400 points, you can round out pretty much whatever you want. And it's not just Warhammer Fantasy that suffered this. Over the years, Warhammer 40k was, generally speaking, a 1,500 point game. If we look at it now, it's a 2,000 point game. We're expected to play a bigger game, albeit this does seem to be more driven by Games Workshop. There was, however, a growth in the tournament scene, I think, towards those bigger and bigger games. I have done a few events for 9th edition, not the current edition, where the games were played at 1,500 points. And actually, army building, I think, is a lot more difficult at that level, because suddenly compromises are having to be made. You can't just have everything you want that supports everything. You have to make cuts and leave yourself vulnerable, recognize that, and cover that vulnerability. So where does that leave us? Well, Warhammer The Old World, when we look at army building, allows you to have, in some circumstances, a limited number of units per 1,000 points. Now, I've not seen the rulebook yet, so I don't know if it's per full 1,000 or part thereof, but it does seem to be scaled around the idea that you're going playing a 1,000 point game, a 2,000 point game, etc. So this for me begs the question is 2,000 points going to once again be the standard size of a game of Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer The Old World? I kind of hope it does, because not only does it mean that armies will be smaller, and that's going to be important as well, because we're playing on the same size or potentially a slightly smaller table with models on bigger bases, so space is going to become more of a a premium, but it also helps with that accessibility problem that's really plagued Warhammer 8th edition. So for me, having thrown a couple of lists together just to get rough ideas of models I'll need, etc. from the previews, I'm feeling like 2,000 points. It just feels appropriate at this point in time. But what do you people think? Do you think 2,000 points is going to be the standard? Do you think we're going to get creep to 2,400 points, 2,500 points? What are tournaments in your areas? There's a lot popping up. What are they sort of suggesting? I've not looked in any great detail myself. Do let me know in the comments down below. What is a good size for you for a game of Warhammer, for a casual, standard, everyday pickup game of Warhammer, not necessarily a tournament game or a narrative game or whatever. So do let me know in the comments down below. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.